He said, "Forget about tomorrow," then kissed me like there was no tomorrow. I used to think that love was something I'd stumble into naturally, like tripping over a crack in the sidewalk. You're not looking for it, and suddenly you're down on the ground, staring at it. Movies, books, even those late-night conversations with friends had drilled the idea into me that one day, love would simply arrive. No preparation, no warning, no effort. Just a spark, an ignition, a blaze you can't control. But real life isn't a movie. And for someone like me, love always felt delayed, postponed, maybe even withheld. I was 23 the first time I met him. Let's call him Daniel. He wasn't supposed to matter to me. He was just someone my friend group invited out one evening. Someone who slipped into the circle like he'd always belonged there. I noticed him, but I didn't notice him. Not at first. He was one of those people who looked at home anywhere. Leaning against the bar, laughing with strangers, smiling that lopsided smile that made you feel like you were in on a joke you hadn't heard yet. I remember thinking, he's dangerous. Not dangerous in the kind of way that hurts you instantly. Dangerous in the way someone makes you curious. Curious enough to lean in, curious enough to want to be seen by them. The night went on. Drinks, music, casual chatter. My friends were loud, messy, alive. And then there was Daniel, quieter but still lit up from the inside, like a candle glowing behind glass. At some point, he and I ended up outside. I don't remember who walked out first, but the air was cool, and the city was humming like it always does when you're young and a little restless. That's when he asked me a question. A strange one, really. "Do you ever think about tomorrow?" I laughed. "Like, in general?"
No.
"I mean, do you think about it so much that you forget today? That you forget to actually live?" The question landed heavier than I expected. Because the truth was, I did. I thought about tomorrow all the time. I thought about the next step, the next choice, the next version of myself I was supposed to become. I thought about whether people would still like me if they knew all the things I tried to hide. And maybe that's why I wasn't really living in the moment. Maybe that's why I always felt a little behind. "I guess I do," I admitted. "I guess I think about it too much." Daniel tilted his head, studying me. And then, with that easy smile, he said words that I didn't know would tattoo themselves onto my memory. "Forget about tomorrow. Just for tonight." Something in me shifted. Something broke open. We ended up walking. Just the two of us, wandering streets that felt empty except for us. The city lights stretched above, and the rhythm of our footsteps felt almost like music. We didn't say much, but every silence was comfortable. Every glance lingered a little too long. And then, at some point, we stopped at the corner of a quiet street. He was closer than before, close enough that I could see the flecks of gold in his eyes, close enough that I could hear the faint catch in his breath. And then he kissed me. It wasn't careful. It wasn't cautious. It was desperate, full, reckless. Like he was pouring all the air in his lungs into me. Like he was giving me something he couldn't give anyone else. His hands gripped the sides of my jacket, pulling me in as if he was afraid I'd vanish if he let go. And the only thought running through my head was his voice, his words. "Forget about tomorrow." So I did. For the first time in years, I didn't think about what came next. I didn't think about what it meant, or what people would say, or whether it was right. I didn't think about fear. I just thought about him. His lips, his warmth, his pulse racing against mine. When we finally pulled apart, I was breathless. My whole body felt rewired, like someone had plugged me back into life. And he just looked at me with that grin, that spark, and whispered, "See? Not so hard." That was the beginning. The beginning of something I didn't know I needed, something I didn't know how to hold on to, and something that would eventually break me in ways I couldn't imagine. Because the truth is, Daniel wasn't mine. Not really. He was a man living a life full of unspoken complications. A man who carried secrets like stones in his pocket. And even though that night he told me to forget about tomorrow, eventually tomorrow came. But before all that, there was us. There was this chapter where we tried to hold the world still long enough to keep each other close. And that chapter began with a kiss that burned itself into me. A kiss that told me what it felt like to finally stop running, finally stop waiting, finally stop thinking about tomorrow. That night didn't end quickly. We kept walking, we kept talking. He told me about the books he loved, the places he wanted to see, the kind of person he hoped he might someday become. And I told him things I'd never told anyone, about the fear of being too much and not enough at the same time, about the loneliness that comes from always pretending you're fine, about the ache of wanting to be seen for who you really are. And he listened. He really listened. Like every word mattered, like every confession was something sacred. When we parted ways that night, I didn't want to leave. But he held my hand just long enough before letting go. And with that same quiet intensity, he said, "We'll figure it out. Just not tomorrow. Tomorrow doesn't exist yet." I walked home with my chest on fire, with my mind buzzing, with my heart already knowing something it shouldn't. That I was falling. That I was falling for someone who might not be mine to keep. But in that moment it didn't matter, because he had asked me to forget tomorrow. And for the first time I did. The days after that night felt strange. I woke up in the mornings with a buzzing under my skin, like some invisible current was running through me. The city looked different, too. Streets I had walked 100 times before now felt alive, as if they'd been holding their breath until I noticed them. Everything glowed with the memory of his kiss, of his words, of that moment where the world shrank down to the space between us. But here's the thing about moments like that, they don't stay in a bubble. Reality creeps in, as it always does. We didn't text constantly. We didn't call every night. Daniel wasn't that kind of person. He came in waves. Sudden, consuming, pulling me under. And then he'd vanish, leaving me gasping in the quiet. At first, I told myself it was fine. That's just who he was. Maybe that's even what made him so magnetic. The way he appeared out of nowhere, set fire to everything, and then disappeared before the smoke cleared. But the more it happened, the more I found myself waiting. Waiting for the message that might come at 2 a.m., waiting for the knock on my door when I least expected it. Waiting for that feeling of being alive again, the feeling I only seemed to find when he was near. And when he did show up, God, it was like nothing else. He'd smile that half smile, the one that carried secrets, and he'd say something casual like, "You busy?" As if he didn't know that I'd drop everything the second he asked. As if he didn't realize the hold he had on me. We had these nights that felt stolen from another world. Nights where we lay on my couch with music playing low, his arm brushing against mine, the space between us electric. Nights where he'd lean over and kiss me like he had the first time, wild, unrestrained, as if we were running out of time. Nights where he'd hold me afterward, his head resting against my shoulder, and whisper things he never said in daylight. "You make me forget," he told me once. "Forget what?" I asked. "Everything. Everyone. The weight I'm carrying." He paused, his breath warm against my neck. "With you, it's just now." I wanted to ask him what that weight was, what shadows followed him when he wasn't with me. But I didn't, because every time I thought about tomorrow, I remembered what he told me that first night. Forget about tomorrow. Just for tonight. So I let myself live in the present. I let myself believe that the present was enough. But the cracks were there even then. Sometimes, when I reached for his hand, he'd pull away. Too fast. Like he didn't want anyone to see. Sometimes, when I asked about his day, he'd dodge the question, his eyes flicking to the floor. And sometimes, when I thought he was mine, I'd see a shadow cross his face, as if he remembered a life outside of us. A life I wasn't allowed to touch. I should have asked. I should have demanded clarity. But I didn't, because I was terrified of the answer. Terrified that if I pushed too hard, he'd leave. And losing the fragments of him felt worse than never having him at all. One night, after weeks of this back-and-forth rhythm, he showed up at my door with no warning. His eyes were red, his hands shaking. He didn't say hello. He just walked in, dropped his jacket, and kissed me like he was drowning. There was something desperate in it, something broken. I didn't ask what was wrong. I just held him, kissed him back, let him cling to me like I was the only thing keeping him from falling apart. We ended up on the floor, tangled in each other, and for the first time, I felt the sharp edge of something I hadn't wanted to admit. He didn't just want me. He needed me. And needing someone, that's dangerous. When it was over, he lay there with his head on my chest, silent for a long time. I could feel his heartbeat hammering against me, faster than it should have been. Finally, in the quiet, he whispered, "I can't keep doing this." The words cut through me like a blade. I wanted to ask, doing what? Being with me? Loving me? Hiding me? But I couldn't form the words. He lifted his head, looked at me with eyes full of things he wasn't saying, and then he kissed me again, so fiercely it almost hurt. And against my lips, he whispered, "Forget about tomorrow." And I did. Again. Against my better judgment. Against the voice in my head screaming that tomorrow was coming whether we liked it or not. I let myself drown in him, because I didn't know how to do anything else. The morning after, he was gone before I woke. No note, no message, just silence. And that silence was the beginning of the unraveling. Because you can only forget about tomorrow for so long before it comes crashing down around you. I told myself I could handle it, that I could survive on pieces of him. Stolen nights, fleeting touches, words spoken in the dark. But the truth is, I was falling deeper than he was willing to let me. I was handing him all of me, while he was only giving me fragments. And fragments, no matter how beautiful, can't hold you together forever. I should have walked away then. I should have chosen myself. But I didn't, because when you've been starved for love, even crumbs can feel like a feast. And Daniel was a feast I knew would ruin me. But still, I stayed. Staying with Daniel was like living in a dream you knew would eventually end. Every moment we had together felt heightened, electric, because deep down I knew it was temporary. When he laughed with me, I laughed harder. When he kissed me, I kissed back with everything in me, as if I could store the feeling for the days when he'd disappear. And he did disappear. Not forever, never forever. Just long enough to remind me that I wasn't his priority. Long enough to make me question whether I even existed in the parts of his life I wasn't allowed to see. He was like a comet, blazing, bright, unforgettable, but gone before you could ever reach out and hold him still. The hardest part wasn't the silence when he was gone. It was the way he came back as if nothing had happened. One night, after nearly a week without hearing from him, he knocked on my door. When I opened it, my chest tight, ready to demand answers, he just grinned like he'd only been gone a few hours and said, "You've got that face, the one that's been missing me." And I hated him for being right. I hated how quickly my anger dissolved the moment he touched me, how easily I let him back in. Because the truth was, I didn't want to fight. I just wanted him. But cracks have a way of widening, no matter how tightly you try to hold the pieces together. One evening, we were lying on my couch, music humming low. His arm was draped lazily across my chest, his fingers tracing absent circles on my shirt. And for a second, it felt almost ordinary. Almost like we were two people who belonged to each other. That's when I asked the question I had been too afraid to ask before. "Daniel, what are we?" He froze. The circles on my chest stopped. His eyes stayed fixed on the ceiling. I tried again, softer this time. "I mean, what is this to you?" "Us." The silence stretched so long I thought he might never answer. Finally, he sighed. "We're us." I frowned. "That doesn't mean anything." "It does to me," he said quickly. Then, almost too quietly, "Isn't that enough?" It should have been enough. At least that's what I told myself. But my heart knew better. My heart knew I wanted more than stolen nights and whispered words. I wanted him in the sunlight, not just in the shadows. I wanted tomorrow, not just tonight. But Daniel wasn't offering tomorrow. He was offering fragments of now, and expecting me to be grateful. And the worst part? I was, because when he kissed me again, pulling me back into his orbit, all my questions dissolved. His lips pressed against mine, hot and desperate, and he whispered it again. "Forget about tomorrow." And like always, I listened. But each time I forgot about tomorrow, the ache grew sharper, the longing heavier, the hope more dangerous. The breaking point came on a night I didn't see coming. We were at a friend's party, surrounded by people who didn't know our secret. We weren't together there, at least not in a way anyone else could see. I was just another guest, and he was just another man with a drink in his hand, laughing too loudly, charming everyone in the room. But then I saw it. The way he leaned in close to someone else, whispering something that made them laugh. The way his hand brushed their arm, casual but lingering. The way he looked at them, the way I wished he'd look at me when other people were watching. Something inside me cracked wide open. I slipped out onto the balcony, the night air sharp in my lungs. I told myself not to cry, not here, not where anyone could see. But the tears came anyway, hot and relentless. And then, as if summoned by my breaking, Daniel appeared behind me. "You okay?" he asked, his voice low. I laughed bitterly. "Am I okay? Really?" He stepped closer. "What's that supposed to mean?" "It means I'm tired," I snapped, the words tumbling out before I could stop them. "I'm tired of being your secret. I'm tired of only existing when it's convenient for you. I'm tired of forgetting about tomorrow just because you say so. What about when tomorrow comes, Daniel? What then?" His face tightened, his jaw clenching. For a moment I thought he might finally tell me the truth. But instead, he looked away, out over the city, and said softly, "I can't give you that." The words landed like stones in my chest. "Then what are we doing?" I asked, my voice breaking. He turned back to me, his eyes full of something that looked a lot like regret. And then he kissed me, hard, urgent, almost angry. And against my lips, like always, he whispered, "Forget about tomorrow." But this time, the words cut instead of comforted. Because I finally understood what they really meant. He wasn't just asking me to live in the moment. He was asking me to accept that tomorrow would never belong to us. And I didn't know if I could. After that night on the balcony, something shifted between us. It wasn't immediate. There were still kisses, still moments of laughter, still nights where I let myself pretend we were something more. But beneath it all, a fracture had opened. I couldn't unhear his words. "I can't give you that." It echoed in the quiet spaces between us. When he reached for my hand, I thought of it. When he smiled at me, I felt it beneath the warmth. And when he whispered, "Forget about tomorrow," against my lips, I finally knew what he was really saying. Don't expect me to stay. But I stayed anyway.
Gu, you stayed.
Because love isn't logical. Love doesn't care about the conditions, the boundaries, the warnings. Love just sees the person, the spark, the way their laugh feels like sunlight in your chest. And it says yes, even if it hurts. And it did hurt. More than I wanted to admit. One evening, he came over after work. He looked exhausted, shadows under his eyes, his usual energy dimmed. I made us tea, and we sat on the couch in silence for a while. I wanted to ask what was wrong, but I'd learned by then that Daniel only gave pieces of himself when he was ready, and sometimes he never was. So instead, I just reached out and touched his hand. He squeezed mine hard, like he needed the pressure to keep himself together. Finally, he said, "You make me feel like I can breathe. It should have been beautiful. It should have been enough." But instead, I felt the ache deepen, because I realized that was all I was to him. A breath of air in the middle of whatever storm he was hiding from. A moment of relief. Pause button. Not a partner. Not a future. And yet, I kissed him. I kissed him like he was mine, even though I knew he wasn't. The cruel thing about love is that sometimes the moments of joy outweigh the truth. A single night of his arms around me could erase a week of silence. A single smile could silence the questions piling up in my chest. But the truth has a way of clawing back to the surface. It happened on a rainy night. I had been waiting for him again. Waiting for the message, the call, the knock on the door. Hours passed and I finally gave up, telling myself I wouldn't care anymore. I went to bed angry, empty, tired. And then, at 3 a.m., my phone buzzed. "Can I come over?" I should have said no. I should have let him sit with whatever ghosts haunted him. But instead, I found myself unlocking the door, my heart pounding with that same familiar hope. When he walked in, he was drenched, his clothes clinging to him, his hair dripping water onto the floor. He looked wrecked, like something had broken inside him. Without a word, he grabbed me, pulling me into a kiss so fierce it knocked the air from my lungs. His hands shook against me, his breath ragged, his whole body trembling. "Daniel, what happened?" I whispered, He just shook his head, pressing his forehead to mine. Don't ask. Please. Just don't ask. So I didn't. We ended up on the couch, curled into each other. His chest rose and fell too fast, his eyes darting like he was fighting something inside his head. And for the first time, I realized I couldn't just be his escape. I couldn't keep being the place he ran to when tomorrow got too heavy. But I didn't say it. Couldn't. Because when he finally calmed, when his body softened against mine and his breathing steadied, he whispered something that broke me open completely. I wish I could stay here forever. I froze. The words hung between us, heavy and fragile. Then stay, I said, almost begging. Stay. But he just closed his eyes, shaking his head. You don't understand. And maybe I didn't, because he never let me. That night, when he finally fell asleep in my arms, I lay awake staring at the ceiling. My chest ached with the weight of it all, his closeness, his distance, his contradictions. I wanted to believe him. I wanted to believe that somewhere inside him he wanted tomorrow with me, too. But the evidence said otherwise. He was a man living two lives, and I was only allowed into one of them. The breaking point came soon after. We were walking through the city, late at night, his arm brushing mine. For once, the streets felt quiet, almost peaceful. I wanted to reach for his hand, but I stopped myself. We passed a couple holding hands openly, laughing, and my heart twisted with longing. Do you ever wish? I started, then stopped. He glanced at me. What? Do you ever wish we could be like that? Out in the open?
No, Hayden.
His expression shifted, tightening. Don't start this. I'm not starting anything, I said quickly, though my voice betrayed me. You know I can't, he interrupted. His tone was sharp, final. Why not? I asked, the words spilling out before I could swallow them. Why can't we be something real? Why can't we have more than this? He stopped walking. For a moment I thought he might actually answer. But instead, he just looked at me, his eyes full of sorrow and walls I couldn't break through. And then, almost pleading, he whispered the same words he always did. Forget about tomorrow. But this time I couldn't. Not anymore. Because tomorrow was all I could think about. Tomorrow, and the day after that, and every day I'd spend waiting for him to choose me, and knowing he never would. That night, after we said goodbye, I cried harder than I had in years. Because I finally understood. The love I wanted, the love I needed, wasn't one I could find in him. And yet, I still wanted him. God help me, I still wanted him. Wanting him became its own kind of addiction. I knew he was bad for me, at least the version of him I was allowed to have. But every time I thought I was strong enough to walk away, he'd show up again, all fire and tenderness and desperate kisses, and I'd crumble. It's funny, in a way. If someone had asked me before Daniel what I wanted in love, I would have said, honesty, stability, safety. But with him, I settled for fragments. I told myself that scraps of love were better than none at all. And then came the night everything finally collapsed. It was a Saturday. He had texted me in the afternoon, asking if I wanted to meet him at a bar downtown. It wasn't unusual, we'd done it before. Always in places where nobody knew us, always with the kind of casual distance that made it look like we were just friends. I almost said no. I almost told him I was tired of the secrecy, tired of feeling invisible. But instead I went. When I got there, he was already a few drinks in, laughing too loudly, eyes a little glassy. He looked beautiful, though he always did. For a while it felt normal. We drank, we joked, we brushed against each other in ways no one else noticed. And then it happened. A woman walked in, stunning, confident. She came straight to him, touched his arm, kissed his cheek like it was the most natural thing in the world. And Daniel, he didn't flinch. He didn't look surprised. He just smiled at her, leaned in, whispered something that made her laugh. My stomach dropped. I don't know if she was his girlfriend, his ex, someone in between. But in that moment, it didn't matter. What mattered was the way he let her claim him in front of everyone, while I sat there invisible. I left before he noticed. At least, I think I did. I stumbled out into the night air, my chest tight, my throat burning. I didn't know where I was walking. I just knew I couldn't stay. Later, he called me. Over and over. I ignored it at first, but eventually I answered. Why'd you leave? His voice was slurred but urgent. You know why? I said, my voice shaking. There was a long pause. Then, she doesn't mean anything. The words cut more than they comforted. Because whether she meant anything or not, she had something I didn't. The right to stand beside him in public. The right to touch him without hiding. The right to be acknowledged. I can't do this anymore, Daniel, I whispered. He went quiet. Too quiet. Then finally he said, please, don't say that. But I had to. Because if I didn't, I was going to lose myself completely. I love you, I admitted, the words spilling out before I could stop them. God, I love you. But I can't keep pretending this is enough. I can't keep erasing myself for you. Silence again. And then, in a voice so broken it almost shattered me, he said, I love you too. The world stopped. My breath caught. Those were the words I had been waiting to hear. The words I thought would fix everything. But then he added, I just can't love you the way you want me to. And just like that, the hope died. Because what good are 3 words if they come with chains? What good is love if it's never free, never whole, never allowed to breathe in the daylight? I cried that night. I cried until my chest hurt, until my eyes swelled, until my body gave out. Not just because of him, but because of me. Because I had known all along that this would end like this, and I had stayed anyway. Because I had chosen the temporary high of his arms over the long-term safety of my own heart. The days that followed were brutal. He tried to reach out. Messages, calls showing up at my door. But I couldn't answer. I couldn't let myself be pulled back in. Because I knew if I saw him, if I heard him whisper, forget about tomorrow one more time, I'd cave. And I couldn't cave. Not anymore. Weeks went by. Slowly the ache dulled. I learned how to breathe without him. I learned how to wake up in the morning without checking my phone for his name. I learned that survival isn't about not hurting. It's about hurting and choosing to keep going anyway. But I won't lie. There are still nights when I dream of him. Nights when I wake up reaching for a body that isn't there. Nights when I remember the way he kissed me like the world was ending. Like tomorrow didn't exist. And maybe that's what makes it so hard. Because for a little while with him, tomorrow really didn't exist. There was only us, only now, only the fire that burned so bright it left scars. People talk about heartbreak like it's just pain. But it's more than that. It's grief for something that never fully belonged to you. It's mourning a future that was never written. A tomorrow that was never promised. I don't regret him. I don't regret the nights we had. The kisses, the way he made me feel alive in ways I hadn't before. But I regret the parts of myself I lost trying to hold on to him. Love taught me many things. With Daniel, it taught me that sometimes the most beautiful thing someone can give you is also the most destructive. That sometimes a kiss isn't a promise. It's just a moment. And moments, no matter how breathtaking, can't build a tomorrow. And yet, if you asked me if I'd do it again, if I'd let him kiss me on that quiet street corner, if I'd let him tell me to forget about tomorrow, I don't know if I could say no. Because even though he broke me, he also woke me up. And maybe that's what love does. Maybe it doesn't always stay. Maybe it doesn't always last. Maybe sometimes it just arrives, tears you open, makes you feel everything you didn't know you could feel, and then leaves you standing in the wreckage, forced to rebuild. And maybe, just maybe, that's enough. Healing after Daniel wasn't a straight line. Some days I felt free. I'd wake up, stretch into the sunlight, and feel proud of myself for not checking my phone, for not craving the sound of his voice. Other days, it hit me like a punch to the chest. Walking past the bar where we first talked, hearing a song he used to hum under his breath, catching sight of someone with his kind of smile. Grief is strange like that. It doesn't ask permission. It just shows up. And even stranger, it doesn't only hurt. Sometimes it makes you grateful. Grateful for the fact that you once felt something that powerful, even if it didn't last. Grateful that you survived it, even when you thought you couldn't. I'd sit alone sometimes, late at night, replaying it all in my head. The first kiss. The way he whispered, forget about tomorrow. The way I believed him again and again. And instead of bitterness, I often felt something softer. Longing mixed with acceptance. Because in his own broken way, he had given me something real. He had shown me what it felt like to be completely consumed by another person, even if it wasn't forever. But I also knew I couldn't let that kind of love define me. I couldn't keep chasing fragments. So I started to rebuild. Slowly. I focused on myself, on things I had abandoned while waiting for him to choose me. I went back to painting, something I'd loved as a kid, but had convinced myself I was too busy for. I filled canvases with messy strokes, colors clashing, raw emotions bleeding out through brushes instead of tears. I started running again, letting the rhythm of my feet on pavement burn out the anger still hiding in my chest. And I opened myself up to other people. Not in the sense of diving headfirst into another love, but in the small ways. Dinners with friends, conversations with strangers, moments of connection that reminded me I wasn't invisible. But even in those moments, he was there. Not physically, but like a ghost. Daniel had become a part of my story, whether I wanted him to or not. He was the scar that would always itch when the weather changed, the song that would always sting a little when it played. One evening, months later, I saw him again. I hadn't planned it. I was walking through the city, carrying groceries, when I spotted him across the street. He was standing with someone, a man I didn't recognize. They were laughing, close, his hand resting lightly on the other guy's shoulder. For a second, my breath caught. My body tensed, ready for the old ache to come rushing back. But then, it didn't, or at least not in the same way. I watched him for a moment longer, then kept walking. He didn't see me, and that was okay. Because in that instant, I realized something. I didn't need him to see me anymore. I had seen myself. That night, when I got home, I pulled out an old canvas and painted the city skyline. But this time, instead of dark shadows and jagged edges, I filled it with light. Colors that bled into each other softly, warmly, like the sunrise after a long night. Because that's what healing felt like. Not erasing the darkness, but letting the light back in. Sometimes I still think about the last thing he ever whispered to me. Forget about tomorrow. For so long, those words felt like a curse, like a demand to stay small, to accept less, to shrink myself into the fragments he was willing to offer. But now I think about them differently. Maybe forgetting tomorrow just for a moment was what I needed. Maybe I needed to stop obsessing over the future long enough to actually feel what was happening in front of me, to learn what love could do, what it could destroy, and what it could teach. Because tomorrow did come, and it hurt, but it also carried me forward, into a version of myself that was stronger, braver, more alive. Daniel didn't give me forever. He didn't even give me tomorrow. But he gave me a story of passion and heartbreak, of longing and survival. A story that carved me open and forced me to grow. And maybe that's enough. Maybe that's what love really is sometimes. Not the happy ending, but the storm that pushes you into becoming who you were meant to be. So when I look back now, I don't just see the pain. I see the beauty too. The nights we laughed until our stomachs hurt. The way his lips felt like fire against mine. The way, for a brief moment, I believed in something bigger than myself. And yes, I see the heartbreak, the loneliness, the empty spaces he left behind. But those spaces didn't stay empty. I filled them with art, with friendship, with myself. That's the thing about being broken open. You get to decide how to put yourself back together. And sometimes you come back stronger. Sometimes you come back brighter. And sometimes you finally understand that tomorrow, the thing you were once told to forget, isn't something to fear. It's something to look forward to. Because tomorrow means healing. Tomorrow means possibility. Tomorrow means you survived today. And tomorrow, I know this much, I will keep going. Even without him. Especially without him.